Welcome to the Picky Girl Travels podcast. I'm Adalia Borashade. Every week on this podcast, I like to share my own personal experiences or those of guests because I want to demystify, travel, living abroad, managing your money, all those things that might be keeping women back from figuring out how to live the life that they want to live. 5 years ago, I made a very, very, very conscious, intentional, deliberate decision to start living life on my terms. I know y'all hear me say that all the time about, like that's what this podcast is about, is living life on your own terms. Before this point 5 years ago, when I turned 40, just before I turned 40, my life was really not about me. It was about, trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect teacher, the perfect this, the perfect that, but not the perfect Adalia, not the Adalia that would be happy. And consequently, I was failing at all of it. I mean, I guess technically there were some wins along the way. Like I was very good at holding my shit together and making it look like I was okay, but I was not okay, not in the least. Um, Ultimately, I wasn't able to be everything to everybody at at the level that I wanted to. So I really felt like I was just failing at life altogether. Why was I in this situation? Why was I feeling like this? I think I lost myself. Who I was, who Adelia was, the individual, and what I wanted out of life kind of got pushed to the side because I felt that that was necessary so that my focus could be on other people and on other things, the real important things. And as I sit here and tell you this, I can't help but think, like, what the fuck? Like, that is such a stupid way of thinking. There is so much wrong with that way of thinking. So much so that we don't have time to unpack it all here today. But I will say that, once I started to look at my life, it's kind of like a come to Jesus moment. I had to acknowledge the fact that like it was kind of all a sham. Like it wasn't what it appeared to be on the outside. I wasn't fulfilled. I wasn't happy, and I was like, is this it? Is this what I get? Like if I died today, and this would be it, is this? Am I happy with this being the life that I leave behind, the legacy that I leave behind? Is this how I want my life to end up? And the answer to that was no. I mean, I had to make a choice. I could choose to continue to live that existence, or I could choose to pursue a life that made me happy, that I found fulfilling, that was about living life on my terms and not like what society said or anybody else. I think it's kind of obvious which one I chose because otherwise I would not be sitting right here talking to you now. So, what's the point of all of this? Why am I telling you this story? Um, because I think it would be irresponsible for me to come on this podcast and talk about, changing your life and following your intuition and living life on your own terms if I didn't acknowledge that there was a certain amount of privilege that allowed me to do that, allowed me to be able to do that. Um, and specifically, I'm thinking about the financial privilege. Um, and I don't just mean in the sense that it costs money to do things like travel or go back to school or pay for your divorce or move abroad or whatever. I mean that there's a financial privilege in that if you don't have to worry about money, you don't have the fear of financial security hanging over your head, you feel more comfortable, you feel more free exploring your options. I I I really get irritated with personalities that talk about like all this life-changing things you can do, but they never address like, hey, you've got to be in a good financial situation to do that. So when you don't have that fear of financial insecurity hanging over your head, you can rewrite your story however you see fit because you don't have that fear, that uncertainty holding you back. You don't have that placing a limit on what's possible or what even you consider to be possible. Now, if you don't believe me, take a moment and think about some of the like long-term dreams and aspirations and hopes, things that you've always kind of said like, "Oh, I'd really love if I could do this thing or X, Y, and Z thing." Okay? How many of those things, when you think about them, like, oh, I'd really love to, learn how to cook French cuisine or whatever, do you immediately then follow it up with, yeah, but I can't really afford to do that, or that's too expensive, or that's not in my budget? See, that's what I'm talking about. Uh, you can't get your life together if your money isn't together. There is so that's so that's kind of what we're talking about today. There seems to be a little bit of, I don't know if I'd call it a debate, but you hear people say, money can't buy happiness. And then there are those people who are like, yeah, it can. And I'm not here to debate either one of those because I'm in a whole separate group. I'm in the money equals freedom group. Um, when I think about over the last 5 years, there have been at least 5 times that I made huge monumental changes in my life, that had I not had my money together, I don't know that I would have made those changes. And not making them, I wouldn't be where I am now. Like the first one being getting a divorce. There are a lot of women who stay married to people they shouldn't be married to because they aren't comfortable where they are financially. And they, going out on your own, or one, the cost associated with getting a divorce, and then two, being able to navigate possibly caring for children and supporting yourself and maintaining a household when you've had someone help with that previously. For a lot of women, that's enough to keep them someplace where they're unhappy, and then a year later, I moved to Honduras. When I moved to Honduras, I took a 60% pay cut. You can't do that willy-nilly. My lifestyle did not shrink by 60%. I still traveled. I still, did some of the things that I do. And the way I look at it is I was free enough to take that job and the 60% pay cut because I had my financial life together. And then within less than a year, the job in Honduras did not go to plan like it was supposed to, and I found myself with no job, needing to relocate. And instead of going back to the US, I decided to move to Mexico with no job. And navigate being a foreigner there, finding an apartment, all of those things. I navigated that on my own. I didn't have any of the financial assistance that usually comes with relocating for work, and about a year later, I found myself living in Kuwait which was just a hot mess of an experience. And I remember clearly talking to my oldest daughter about my plans to bail early on the situation, not stick through my contract because of the nonsense that was going on there. And, talking about like, I was in a financial situation that I could walk away from that job. I could afford to buy my own ticket home. I didn't need the company to buy my ticket home. I could do that because I had options. And the reason I had options is because I had my money together. There were some people I was working with who they didn't have those options for whatever reason. It could have been that they were financially responsible for some other people, or, whatever, they didn't have savings, but for whatever reason, they had to stay and tolerate more of that bullshit that I didn't have to put up with. And I didn't have to sacrifice my mental health any longer than was absolutely necessary. I could leave. And then, we fast forward to my current situation. Um, Even before the pandemic, I had decided that okay, it's time for me to retire from teaching. I'm quitting my job. I won't be, or at least the plan was, not to be looking for another teaching job, that I was going to kind of take some time off and sort some things out. Again, there's a lot of privilege in being able to make that choice, because I have, I am in a comfortable enough financial situation to do that. So that's what we're talking about this week. That's why I told you that big long story is, money comes up a lot when people ask about moving abroad. Uh, they want to know how did you afford it, or like taking a sabbatical, which is kind of what my time in Mexico the first time around turned out to be. There are a lot of people who are in stressful situations, and it would just do them really well to be able to take a year off to do whatever, maybe travel the world, but they can't, or they figure they can't because they don't have the money for it. So, like, that's what I mean by money is a topic that always comes up associated with that. Um, or it could be in creating the life you want. It could be about leaving a relationship that is no longer serving you, or quitting a job to go chase whatever dream it was that you had. So, how did I get to this situation where I had my money together? What exactly does that mean? Um, I guess I'm not rich. We will never use that word when talking about me. But I have enough money that, like, suddenly losing my job is not like panic inducing. Okay. So I like to term that financial security. So yeah, I have financial security. So how did I get there? Because I was not born into a situation that was that way. Um, I think the first thing is I had to change my mindset. Um, Actually, because of the way I grew up, I very much had a scarcity mindset when it came to money. Like, I was always worried about there being enough money because I didn't want to be homeless. I didn't want to starve. Um, and I have not had a safety net for the vast majority of my life. So if I ever found myself in a situation where I couldn't eat, or I didn't have a place to stay, like I didn't have anybody that I could um fall back on. Like there was no safety net for me. That is thankfully different now. I do have a a small group of people who would be like, "Yes, you can come crash at my place," that sort of thing, but I did not have that growing up, or for most of my life actually. So that's kind of why my mindset was in that scarcity area. And I think it was finding Paula Pant's blog, Afford Anything. Because I've always like when I've always been about my money, and that's because I never had a safety net. So like I was the kid who was 16 years old and I had my own credit card in my own name, and I was very much like I pay the entire thing off every month. Like I knew to make sure my credit was good. I knew not to spend more than I made, all of that kind of thing. So I've always been money minded, but it was directly tied to, like I can't be in a situation where I don't have any because, I don't have anybody to catch me. But so I had always kind of uh, been reading things, listening to different podcasts or reading blogs. And I think I found Paula Pant on Jay Money's blog, Budgets Are Sexy. And so, in reading Paula's blog, which is called Afford Anything, the philosophy over there is you can afford anything, not everything. And so for me, that's when like there was a little light went off in my head. It's like, okay, you don't have to worry about, oh, there's not enough money to do this, this, and this. It's really you need to think about what's the thing I really want to do and then focus your resources on that. Um, it seems now that I'm sharing it, it seems like a very minor, unimportant thing, but for me at the time, it was kind of huge. So I sat down and I looked at my priorities. Um, some other blog, because I actually still have this list, some other blog I came across was like, list out your goals, and your values and identify the things, the peoples, the habits in your life that contribute and hinder you achieving those goals. Um, and it said to cut out the stuff that doesn't lead to your happiness and success, and then focus on the stuff that does. And oh gosh, I can't even remember how many years ago, but I still have this list. And that's what I did. I made a list of what were the things, first of all, what were my values? And then what were the things that were important to me, like the goals that it was important to me to achieve. And then I compared that to the value list to kind of make sure that they lined up. Okay, so then I figure out like travel, living abroad, those are very important things to me. How do I make that happen? Okay. Okay, so I did that. So then I've got my goals. I know what I'm going to focus on, but that's not where you stop. Then I had to, sort of put my money where my mouth was. And that meant that I couldn't fully put my money to work for me until I understood where it was going. So, I had to track my spending. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you that I'm kind of horrible at this. I will tell you that I have never in my life ever successfully balanced the checkbook. I could never get the number on the bank statement versus the number on my little ledger to match. Okay. So, right there, it tells you that I'm kind of a big picture person, a little less about the details when it comes to stuff like this. So, they all suggest that when you track your money, you like you could write down everything you spend in a notebook. That's not practical for me. For me, it's been more practical to have an app on my phone that as soon as I buy something, I can enter in that purchase. I did try Mint um, once or twice, and the problem I had with it was it was linked to my bank accounts, and so it would automatically categorize spending, but it would not categorize it in a way that I that made sense to me. And because let's say I might let 3 weeks go before I went in there and looked at it trying to correct that, it just got to be overwhelming. And I was like, I'm not about this. I can't do this. So the app that I use to track my spending is called Toshal. Um, and I chose it because it allows you to track your spending in multiple currencies. One summer, I was going through my receipts and I had receipts in like six different currencies. And I was like, how am I supposed to know how much money I spent in dollars? Like doing the math. And so I found Toshal. I can input the receipt, the purchase amount in, euros, dollars, pesos, whatever. And based on the date, it will find the appropriate conversion rate. So I have a really good idea of how much I spent, even if it takes me a couple weeks to input my receipts. That's more of an issue when I travel on day to day, especially here in China where you pay for everything with your cell phone. It's very easy for me to then just open up the Toshal app and be like, okay, I spent this amount on this thing and keep it moving. So yeah, first step one is to track your spending because you can't get control of something you don't know how much is coming in, how much is going out. For me, how much is coming in, I get paid once a month. I get paid pretty much the exact same amount, so that's not a big deal. It for me, it was more about seeing where my money was going. But everybody's situation is different. For some people, they need to see, hey, where are my different streams of income coming from? The next step is obvious. You got to figure out a budget. Because those things that you identified as priorities, they should be priorities in your budget. Here again is an area that I kind of am not great at. I can't budget like normal people. You see these budget templates, or you see where they talk about, okay, this percent needs to go to this kind of activity, this percent needs to go to housing, this percent needs to go to food. I can't do that. I can't say, okay, I'm going to spend $200 this month on activities. And it just seemed that just goes against my nature. Um, because I can never seem to stay within those, no matter how much I adjust them, even if they're based off of what I spent the previous week, this previous month, I can't ever um, make that work. And then I'm somebody who craves simplicity. I like things very, very simple. Everything about my life is simple. I think that I've said that on here before. And again, this is where Paula Pant came through for me. She wrote a post on her blog basically about like the anti-budget or the no budget, which instead of budgeting like normal people, where you say, this is what I will spend on all of these activities, and either a dollar amount or a percentage. The kind of budgeting she talked about was focus on what you want to save or invest. You always hear people talk about pay yourself first. Well, we're going to expand that to not just be like savings and investments, but also those priorities, those goals that you identified. So with this anti-budget, instead of breaking down your income and saying and allotting it to the different activities, the different bills, and then saying, okay, I've got this money left over. What should I do with it? Flip it around. Take the money off the top that goes to those goals, that goes to those big priorities. So if that's saving for your vacation in Fiji, that's saving for your sabbatical year abroad, or saving up for your big move, or buying a car, whatever that goal is, take that money off the top, and then you do whatever you want with the rest. You live on the rest. That is the only kind of budgeting that I have ever been able to do successfully. Um, I will throw in here that I do not carry credit card debt because debt is a tool of the oppressors. And also, I don't like paying more for something than what the with credit over time, if you pay interest, you're paying extra. Why am I going to throw away my money? So, I only use credit. I treat it like a short-term loan, which is what it is. If I put something on a credit card, I pay it off every month. So I don't carry consumer debt. So that's not a line item in my budget. So for me, I prioritized things like when I bought my when I had a car, buying a car, saving for retirement, saving for moving, all of those things. I said, I want my savings percent. I want to save X percent of my salary, or I want to save X amount of dollars. I pulled that off the top. I looked at what was left and was like, okay, after I pay rent and I pay this and I pay that, what am I left with? And I used whatever was left to live my life. That meant maybe I couldn't go out to eat as much as I wanted that month because I only have X amount of dollars left, and that's the money I got to do everything I want to do. So that's the only way I have ever been able to budget. I'll put a link in on the show notes page on the blog um, for Tashel and for Paula Pant's blog post. And so let's talk a little bit more about my savings and investing priorities. Like, again, I want to keep things very simple. So you sometimes see budgets that have all of these different line items like cable, cell phone, this, that, trip, uh, bowling, I don't know, all these things. I can't, that's too much. I don't have space for that in my brain. So the money that I take out at the top, I like to think of money needs a purpose. Like, I don't just put money to the side. What is that money for? So when I pay myself first, my money goes into basically three buckets. Um, there is the oh shit bucket. That is, I guess, what you would call an emergency fund. This is the money that if something goes wrong, I can spend that money on that thing. Again, because I don't want to rely on credit cards, I I put money aside in anticipation of those things. Okay. So, you could argue that when I decided I had to get out of Kuwait, and I needed to buy a plane ticket, I think that was part of my oh shit money. Like, oh shit, this job doesn't work. Let me buy a ticket so I can get out of here. Um, the other one, that's sort of emergency fund, short term. Think longer term or think bigger. That's your fuck you money, your fu money fund. This is the money so that you can tell that job, that man, whoever, f you, I'm out of here. So like, this is the money I use for retirement, or like, I'm quitting my job and I'm going to go into business for myself, or whatever. That that again is more long term. That's a much bigger bucket. And that bucket isn't just savings. That bucket would include investments like stocks. It might include real estate. I don't know. It might include Bitcoin. It's all about what do you want to invest in? But that is a much bigger bucket of money for me. And then there's my hell yeah bucket. This is, your homegirl hits you up and says, hey, well, at least pre-corona, this was possible. Your homegirl says, hey, I found a flight deal to Bali or Tahiti, and we're going for 2 weeks. And you want to be like, hell yeah, I want to go. Um, so this is that it's not emergency money. This is money so that you are ready. You stay ready so you don't have to get ready. This is that money so that you don't have to miss out on any fun thing that you want to do, that your friends want to do, because you have that money right there. Um, and so that's kind of how I think about my money. And so where is all that money? It is like my oh shit money and my hell yeah money. I have a Ally Bank high, what do you call it? High interest, although we're using the word high interest very, very loosely here because as you know, bank accounts pay shit for interest. But in the Ally account, it lets you make buckets. It lets you take your one bank account and divide it up into, I think, something like 10 buckets so that when you look at your account, you can say, like, oh, this $500 is going to the vacation fund. This 2000 is going to the new car fund or the down payment for a house fund or whatever. Because before, uh, I had that kind of account. I literally used to have separate bank accounts in different banks. And like that one bank account, that's what its job was. I like this situation with Ally a lot better because like I said, I'm all about simplicity. And so that works better for me. Um, I'm also so, tracking what you spend and prioritizing the places that your money should go, that's really the hard part. Um, I think the next thing that I did was I made sure to avoid lifestyle inflation. And I think this gets us a lot, especially if you're like me and you grew up where you didn't have a whole lot. When you finally start making some money or you start having a little bit more money, a little bit more disposable money, it's very easy to get sucked into the I want those things that I didn't have before. Maybe it is a newer car, maybe it is more expensive versions of things. Maybe it's something like, I had the basic cable package and now I want the deluxe one. I don't know. But lifestyle inflation, if you can maintain your lifestyle at one level despite your income increasing, think about that extra income that you're not spending on lifestyle. That's money you can be filling your buckets, securing yourself financially so that you can do whatever the hell it is that you want to do. Um, the other thing that was a big shift for me was letting go of the idea that savings was the be all end all. Um, when I think about what my mom taught me about money, it was, to avoid debt, uh, and that you needed to save. But inflation, the rate of inflation is higher than what you will earn simply saving money. You put, like I said earlier, I joked about my high interest savings account, which I think pays a whopping 1.25%, which if you look at the average savings rate in most banks, that is a whole lot more, but that's nothing. Not when the rate of inflation is what, like 3%. So basically, the longer I leave money in that account, I'm technically losing money. So if you're thinking about, your big bucket, your fuck you money, and you're thinking about how you need that money to grow so that you can do these big things, simply saving that money is not enough. You've got to do something with that money to make it grow faster than the rate of inflation. The easiest thing for me is to put that money in the stock market. But there are other investments. I think some of you can remember like Beanie Babies, how a lot of people treated that as an investment. There are a variety of things that you can use it as an investment vehicle. It's really about finding what you're comfortable with, risk wise, what your risk tolerance is. But like I said, for me, it was big when I finally made the shift that, like, oh, it's not that I just need to save money. I need to grow this money. And how do I make this money grow? I invest it. The other thing that I'm still working on, but it is very much shifting my mentality away from you get a job and that job provides your income and that is all the income you have to work with. Um, the reality of the world we live in now is you need multiple streams of income. I'm sure you've heard somebody say that. Now, there are a variety of ways that you can make money. Um, some of them require more labor on your part. Some of them are less labor intensive. You know, you hear people talk about passive income. I don't know that there are very many income sources that are truly passive where you don't have to do anything. You know, I think that's a little bit of a misnomer. But the one thing I will say, and this is, you know, where I am right now in my life to what I'm working on, is making sure that I have money coming in from a variety of sources. I think with the pandemic, this has been underscored that when you have multiple sources of income, you know, when some kind of catastrophic event like this happens, maybe one or two of those sources dries up, but you still have these other ones to count on. You hear people talk about side hustles. Um, there's there's so many different things you can do. Jay Money, whose blog is Budgets Are Sexy, he is big into side hustles, and so I'm gonna link a post from his website, which I think it lists um, more than 70 different ways that you can make money on the side, and he has updated it as recently as April of 2020. Um, you know, some of the things on here like Craigslist gigs, being a bartender, patent research, selling junk mail. Like, who knew like you could make money doing that? Okay, so I'm gonna link that in the show notes. If you're at that point, you're like, yeah, I need to find some other source of income. I need a side hustle, but I don't have any concept of what I could possibly do. Check out J Money's blog post because there are a lot of good ideas on there. Um, I'm also going to link a blog. Well, I wouldn't call it a blog. It's a travel OD. Her specialty is remote work. And I'm sure you've been hearing a lot more about that, especially with the pandemic going on. Um, a lot of people who want to live abroad finding remote work, either as a freelancer or working for a company that doesn't make you physically come into work. That's one way that people do that. Because if you have a job that doesn't require you to be in an office or be in a cubicle every day, you have the freedom to then do your work from wherever you choose in the world. And it's Andrea's website. It's a travel OD. She lists, um, what do you call it? She lists remote opportunities. And so you can see a list of different companies. And she also does some work with like how to build up the skill sets you need to do remote work. So you might want to check out her website. There's some interesting stuff there. Um, and then another resource that I'm going to link is from Stephanie Perry over at WHERE. You might have heard of her, you might not have. If you haven't, you ought to check out her stuff. Stephanie is a house sitter. So she, you know, quit her job to travel the world when she turned 41. And then she decided she didn't want to go back to work. And so she uses house sitting to lower the cost of travel because you don't have to worry about, you know, a hotel or Airbnb if you're house sitting. Well, one of the YouTube videos she has, and she has a really awesome YouTube channel. She has a YouTube video all about ways that side hustles for full-time travelers. So if you want to combine the two, like you want to make money and you want to travel at the same time, she's got a video about that. So I'll post a link to that in the show notes as well. I hope this episode did not come off as preachy because that's really like the opposite of the energy I'm trying to have. It's more the energy that I'm trying to put out there is, hey, this is how I was able to do this. I want to share that game with you, put you on so that you can do it too. So if y'all are interested in hearing more, learning more about, okay, like what are some ways I can invest my money? What are some strategies where I can reduce my costs or things like that? Let me know because that is a particular area of interest of mine. And I definitely would like to share it with you all if that is something you're interested in. I'll go ahead and wrap up this episode of the podcast, reminding you that also on the website, pickygirltravelstheworld.com, in the resources section, there's some resources on budgeting and finances and that sort of thing. If you want to see what I'm up to, you can check out my latest blog posts. You can follow me or see me on IG, Picky Girl Travels. I'm the same thing on Facebook. And then on Twitter, it is Picky Girl Travels. But girl has no I. If you want to support the podcast, please leave a review, whichever podcasting service that you're listening to this on. Please leave a review. If there is something specifically you would like to hear talked about on the podcast, if you go to Anchor, and you find the podcast there, you can actually leave me a voice message. And so take care.
So next you will hear the conversation that Megan and I had a few months ago about her experiences teaching abroad over the last few years. Between all of us, we have experienced teaching in Honduras, Mexico, China, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain. Most of y'all know that I moved abroad about 4 years ago in 2016, and I would definitely say I have seen an increase in the number of people who are interested in doing the same thing. There are two questions that I get a lot, that I see a lot in the various Facebook groups and forums that I'm in. What do you do for a living? What kind of jobs are there that would allow me to live abroad? But the thing is, answering that question for somebody is not straightforward because the answer really depends on some variables like what's your skill set. I think this is probably the most important one because you don't necessarily have to find the same job title that you currently have. You don't have to find that abroad. You could apply for something in a completely different career path, but it uses a skill set that you have. So really, we've got to kind of switch our mentality and stop thinking about titles and think more about skills that are transferable. Something else that's going to impact what you can do abroad is your level of education. Yes, there are some positions where you need to have a master's, you need to have a bachelor's, but there are quite a few opportunities for people who don't have a degree. You can work at a U.S. embassy in the administrative realm, and you don't need a bachelor's degree for that. If you want to work in tech, you don't necessarily need a bachelor's degree. What really matters is what can you do? And then for certain jobs, do you have the right certification? That's more important than anything else. Another area to think about is what country is your passport from? The majority of my audience is from the US and has US passports, but there may be some people who have other passports. This becomes an issue because for some countries, the kind of visas that they will give you are dependent on what is your passport country? Like, for example, my visa here in China has a specific list of countries that they are allowed to grant that visa to people from those countries. So that can play a minor role. It just depends on the country you're trying to go to, as well as what kind of work are you trying to do. Um, Another thing to think about, or that figures into how can you support yourself abroad, or what are your earning expectations? Um, can you go abroad and make the kind of money you would make in the United States? Absolutely. But if that's super important, that is going to impact which countries are appropriate for you to pursue. Um, because the cost of living is generally cheaper outside the United States, you can have a really nice life and make a fraction of what you're making in the US. Um, if you are more flexible about earning expectations, that then gives you a much broader range of opportunities that you could pursue, as well as countries that you can pursue those opportunities in. And then ultimately, you've also got to figure in what are the country's policies. Like, there are some countries that limit the number of visas they give, they limit the number of foreigners they allow into a country, or whether they allow foreigners in at all. So you know, that is going to impact what you can do to make money abroad. So, I wish I had a simple answer for people about, well, here, these are the jobs you can do, and you do this, and that can take you abroad. The answer to that question is very individual. So, you really have to look at your individual situation. But to help you with that, over the next few weeks on the podcast, we are going to talk about um, all of these things, but specifically through the lens of Black women sharing their experiences of how they were able to earn money to live abroad. This week, we will focus on the field that allowed me to make my transition into expat life, and that's teaching. Before I moved to Honduras back in 2016, I had worked in K-12 education for 19 years, most of that time spent teaching some form of social studies or working as an instructional technologist. Um, there are schools all over the world who make money by offering an international education to their students. So if you are a certified teacher from an English speaking country, there is a big demand for you and your services. I mean, at least there was before COVID-19. Honestly, I expect that demand will still be there, or it will recover once the pandemic is under control. But, right now things are a little crazy with so many countries' borders being closed and people not being able to move. But I don't think that COVID-19 is going to have any kind of long-term impact on the number of teachers who can pursue jobs abroad. Um, if you want to teach abroad, and that also includes like principals, counselors, you've got several options. There are what you will hear us refer to as true international schools. This would be like the American School of blah blah blah. This would be the school where the kids' parents like work at the embassy, or they work for an NGO or something like that, or their parents are on a corporate. I'm losing my words. If their parents are corporate expats, like that's how they relocated to the country. Um, there are also local schools that have what they call international programs. So it's a probably a public school, quite possibly. It might be a private school, but they specifically have a program where they are having classes taught in English by foreign instructors. There are private schools, and then in some countries, they actually hire foreign teachers to teach at the public schools. In all of these situations, instruction is done in English. So that's why they want teachers from English speaking countries. They always are looking for native English speakers. In Honduras, I worked at a very, very, very small international school. Um, for the hot second that I was working in Kuwait, I was at a private school. I didn't know it at the time, but that private school had a very poor reputation, which I'm not surprised by at all. And then here in China, the school I work at here is kind of a hybrid. It's not a public school. It's not a private school. It is an offshore Canadian school. So it's kind of somewhere between. It's like if a public school and an international school had a baby, that would be the kind of school that I work at. But the point here is that there are lots of options. Um, I know that there are a lot of teachers in the US who are really tired of the BS that comes with working in the US public school system, but they still want to teach. And so for them, going abroad might be a good option. Um, in oh gosh, I feel like it's because I was going to say in some of the Facebook groups that I'm in, it sounds like I spend my entire life on Facebook, so I may need to readdress that. But in a lot of the Facebook groups that I'm in, people are often asking questions like, I want to teach abroad, where do I start? And so, because I saw the same question over and over and over again, I started to pull together everything I've learned over the last 4 years into an ebook for people who want to teach abroad. And the way I structured the book, I did it around the most frequently asked questions that people looking to get into international teaching have. And then I also included links to different resources that can be used in getting a job, planning a move outside the U.S. internationally. Um, so I finished that book. I've published it. It's on my website, pickygirltravelstheworld.com, but it's also available in Kindle on Amazon. Um, Before the pandemic, I reached out to a couple of my expat teacher friends, Tiffany and Megan, and I had grand plans to interview them and post those interviews on my YouTube channel. And if you're thinking to yourself, like, wow, I didn't know Adalia had a YouTube channel, that's because I don't. I have not been able to get my life together enough to do YouTube, but I thought there was some very valuable information in those conversations. So I have repurposed those conversations for this podcast episode. And then I also spoke to another teacher friend, Tia, more recently. So when you listen to it, you'll hear us kind of allude to the events that are currently taking place in the US. Thank you for listening. If you want more information on that DoD program that Tia mentioned, or the links to my ebook or links to Tiffany's Etsy store, go to the show notes page on the Picky Girl Travels the World website, which is also linked in the description, pickygirltravelstheworld.com/podcast hyphen dash and the number two. Um, if you would like to show support for the podcast, you could leave a review on whatever podcatcher you happen to be listening to this on, Or if you would like to support the podcast in a more tangible monetary way, there is a link. Is there a link? You can go to Anchor and you can make a pledge there. You can, I believe, donate as little as $1 a month. Thanks, guys. See you next week. So here's my interview with Megan, who I originally met when I was living in Mexico City, and then our paths crossed again when I was living in Kuwait and I was visiting Bahrain one weekend. Here's my interview with Tiffany, who I met when I lived in Mexico City as well. And finally, here's my interview with Tia. This was just this week, so that's the beginning of June 2020. So the backdrop, we've got the recent deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, along with the protests that are taking place. So yeah,